In this video, I'm going to be demonstrating how to solder a printed circuit board. Right here we have our finished product. This here, I'm going to turn the sensitivity adjustment here. So what this is, it's a noise to light converter. There's a microphone right down here, and as I speak, you can see the lights blink whenever the microphone picks up noise. So this is how our end product's going to work. We've got the package over here. It's got all of our components, printed circuit board. This is what we're going to be using to build it. These are all the components. We have our soldering iron over here. It's going to be providing the heat to melt the solder. Right now you can just see I have it set. I have the dial. The dial is set for a setting of 4 for heat. That seems to be work best for melting our solder. The solder being right here, it's a 60-40 tin lead solder, so we have lead as a hazard here. We have our fume hood here that's going to be filtering out any of the lead. It's going to be sucking the lead up when we're soldering and the lead fumes and filtering them out. We also want to make sure that we're washing our hands when we're done. We want to make sure that we get our hands good and clean, so if there is any lead residue on our hands, that we wash it off, especially before we eat or anything like that. Some of the other components here, we've got some side cutters here, solder sucker if we need to remove any solder, if we need to resolder any of our joints. Alright, so I'm just opening up the kit here. It has all of our components, and here's the printed circuit board you can see here. This is the side where we're going to be doing all the soldering on, and all the components are in here. What I wanted to point out, very handy, this has a guide. This little kit has a guide. You open it up here. It actually has a step-by-step guide on how to solder and kind of what not to do for soldering. It's also got a guide here to identify the components with the resistor color codes, these little bands here on the resistors. So I can grab a resistor here and point it out. You can see in the bag here, they've got these colored bands right here on these resistors by my thumb. Those are all going to be identified with colors here on this chart. It has the steps. It says to start here, so they install these resistors first. Next they do the LEDs, and then the transistors, capacitors, and so on, all the components. And it's a pretty handy little step-by-step guide. It shows you how to solder up, or the order, I guess, to solder up all the components onto our printed circuit board here. So let's get set up, and I'll solder one of the components. So I've grabbed our first component here, the brown, black, orange resistor, and you can see the bands on the resistor. If I just look here, they're brown, black, orange. The last one there identifies the tolerance, the gold. But from left to right we have brown, black, orange. That's going to be the first resistor that I install into the printed circuit board. So to find out where that goes, we'll have a look at the printed circuit board. So right here, R1, you can see on the circuit board, that's where that resistor is going to go. It's going to go across this hole here on the left and this hole here on the right. It's R1, and how I know that is right here, R1 is brown, black, orange. So all the components are identified with a letter and a number here on the circuit board, and you can see there's an R2, an R3 through 5, and so on, and they're all identified, so it should be pretty easy to install each one of these components. We'll go ahead and solder R1 onto the circuit. Alright, so you can see I've installed the resistor here for R1. I'll just flip it over to the back side where we're going to be doing the soldering, and you can see how I kind of bent the leads for the resistor over so they will hold into place. So we can now lay this just kind of upside down like this, and what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be taking the hot soldering iron, and I'm going to be placing the soldering iron so it touches both that gold ring and the resistor lead, so right down about there, and allowing it to warm up, and then applying some solder to get it to solder. So I'll go ahead and do that. But before I solder this, I'm just going to turn on the ventilation system here, so we are filtering out any of the smoke, so we can hear that turn on. And I'll just move this kind of over and position it. We want to position it kind of up above our circuit board, just like so. Alright, so there you can see I've soldered the first connection point. And when we're done with the solder, we're going to grab the side cutters and bring those in, and then just snip off the lead so then it kind of looks like that. Kind of the best description is it should look kind of like a volcano type shape, the solder. So I'll go ahead and do the next lead just kind of demonstrating it. I'll actually bring the soldering iron and the solder into play. Alright, so you can see I've installed one of the resistors here. I've actually got R2 in here now, and I've soldered one end. Well, I'll demonstrate soldering the last end here, but I just wanted to show how this looks. We want to make sure that our components are fairly close to the printed circuit board. You can see how they're nice and tight to the printed circuit board. If they're up high and stuff, it starts to look a little messy. It's good housekeeping to keep them nice and close to the circuit board, as close as possible. So I have this already. The soldering iron is nice and hot, and I'm just going to show you where we want to place the soldering iron. What you can see here, oops, I'll focus in on the tip of the soldering iron here. It's kind of a brownish color here. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to wipe it off on this dampened pad here, and you should see it clean up quite nicely. There's a little bit of solder on there from when I did my first demo, and you can see it's now nice and coated in solder. That'll provide good heat transfer down here to our joint. So I'm going to be placing this so it touches the gold part of the printed circuit board and the component lead at the same time. So we're going to be putting it right down here for about 2 seconds, and then after that 2 seconds I should be able to touch my solder to the gold part of the printed circuit board or the lead there, and it should start to melt the solder and look something like those other 3 solder joints that we have there. Alright, so I'm just going to clean off the tip of the soldering iron here again like I demonstrated earlier, and now I'm going to apply that heat for 2 seconds. I'll bring this in, make sure I'm touching both the lead and the circuit board for about 2 seconds, and then put some solder in here, and it should look something like that when we're done. So I'll just pull this out and we can have a quick peek and discuss the connection we made. Alright, so you can see there's the lead that I haven't nipped off yet. There's the joint that we just soldered. You can see that it almost looks like a volcano in shape. It should be kind of go up to a peak and then be slightly concave on the way down. So that looks like a pretty good solder, and we'll keep that there, and we don't need to make any changes. So one other thing I did want to mention is if when you are applying the solder, if this isn't hot enough yet, you may need to put a little bit of solder on the soldering iron, and they call that tinning the iron, and it will put some solder on the iron, and that will help increase the conductivity, and it'll allow this to heat up faster and then melt solder, and the solder will then stick to the gold on the circuit board as well. So if you're having trouble with the solder not melting when you first apply the solder, make sure you slightly touch the soldering iron first, and then that will help conduct. So I want to demonstrate the use of our solder sucker here. The way that this functions is it's spring loaded. You just push this down, and then when you push this button right here, there's a piston that sucks air up through this nozzle and sucks any solder off a printed circuit board. So I'll go ahead and demonstrate how that's going to work now. Alright, so I've decided that I don't like this connection point right here. So if we did want to redo it, we could suck the solder off. So we just need to heat up the solder, and then I'll bring in the solder sucker and suck the solder out. So I'll just heat it up first. Oops. And then now you can see it sucked all the solder off, and we should be able to pull the that side of the component off. So there you can see I've pulled the resistor back up. You can see I'll just maybe pull up on a little bit more, and now it's disconnected. So if we wanted to reconnect it with solder again, we would need to push that back through and then apply solder over here on the other side.